Africa is the poorest continent with over 500 million people, equivalent to 39% of Africa's population living below the poverty line. Extreme poverty is on the rise in some of Africa's countries due to the effects of COVID-19 and climate change, which have led to drought and famine in the Horn of Africa and cyclones in the southeast coast of Africa, which have led to death and destruction. Africa still faces significant challenges that have hindered its development and contributed to its status as the poorest continent. Issues such as corruption, political instability, poor infrastructure, and dependence on primary commodities for export have all played a role in Africa's underdevelopment. However, it is important to note that there are also positive developments on the continent, including economic growth and progress in areas such as education and healthcare. List of some of the reasons why Africa might remain the poorest continent in the next century. 1. Corruption. Corruption has been a long-standing problem in Africa and continues to hinder economic growth and development on the continent. The exploitation of resources is another area where corruption is rampant in Africa. The continent is rich in natural resources such as minerals and agricultural produce, but many of these resources are exploited by foreign companies and local elites for personal gain. This leads to the underdevelopment of local industries and economies, and the lack of investment in infrastructure and education systems. As a result, Africa's infrastructure is often poorly maintained, and citizens are left without access to basic services such as electricity and clean water. 2. Political instability. Political instability and conflict are persistent issues in Africa that have had devastating effects on the continent's development. One of the primary causes of political instability is weak governance structures and a lack of accountability. In many African countries, those in power have been known to use violence and intimidation to maintain their grip on power, rather than seeking to represent the interests of all citizens. Conflict in Africa can also be driven by external factors such as resource exploitation, proxy wars, and geopolitical interests. The continent is home to many strategic resources such as oil, gas, and minerals, which can attract foreign powers seeking to exploit these resources. In some cases, this can lead to proxy wars, where different foreign powers back different factions in a conflict, exacerbating tensions and prolonging conflicts. 3. Poor education system. The education system in Africa faces many challenges that have hindered its effectiveness in providing quality education to all students, and many African countries have failed to prioritize education due to lack of political will and commitment to improving education systems. Many African countries have outdated and ineffective curricula, which fail to prepare students for the modern economy. Additionally, a lack of access to technology and digital learning resources further exacerbates this problem. Furthermore, gender disparities in education remain a significant challenge, with girls often facing barriers such as early marriage and lack of access to schools. 4. Poor infrastructure. Poor infrastructure is a major challenge in Africa, which has hindered economic growth and development on the continent. Many African countries lack adequate transportation systems, including roads, railways, and ports, which makes it difficult to move goods and people around the continent. This can lead to high transportation costs, making it difficult for local industries to compete in global markets. Inadequate infrastructure in Africa is often linked to inadequate investment and lack of political will. Many African governments have failed to prioritize infrastructure development, which has resulted in a lack of funding for infrastructure projects. 5. Dependence on primary commodities. Dependence on primary commodities for export is a significant challenge facing many African countries. Many African countries rely heavily on the export of primary commodities such as minerals, oil, and agricultural products to generate revenue and support their economies. However, this dependence makes these countries vulnerable to fluctuations in global commodity prices, which can have a significant impact on their economies. African countries export raw materials, which are then processed and refined in other countries, creating value for those countries rather than for the African countries that produce the commodities. This results in a missed opportunity to create jobs and add value to the economy through the local processing and refining of these commodities. This dependence on primary commodities often leads to the neglect of other sectors of the economy, such as manufacturing and services, which can lead to a lack of economic diversification. Primary commodity exports are often associated with environmental degradation and resource depletion, which can have long-term impacts on the economy and society. Unless high levels of corruption, political instability, poor education system, poor infrastructure, and dependence on primary commodities are addressed, Africa's economic growth and development will be hindered in the coming decades. Many African countries have made significant strides in recent years, with some experiencing strong economic growth, including Ethiopia, Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Ghana. Additionally, there have been efforts to address the challenges facing the continent, including increased investment in infrastructure and education, as well as efforts to combat corruption and improve governance. While progress has been slow and uneven, there are reasons for optimism about Africa's future. With continued commitment and investment, Africa can overcome its challenges and achieve sustainable development that benefits all its citizens.